In the next couple of lessons, we're going to discuss the function of the cardiovascular system. And one overarching question I want you to think about is why does our exercise capacity go down in conditions that affect the cardiovascular system? So, one really common condition for any of you guys and girls that are going into medicine, you'll most likely see is heart failure. And individuals with heart failure have extremely low exercise capacity and exercise tolerance. Things that used to be easy for them fatigue them very quickly. And over the next couple of weeks, as we discuss cardiovascular function, I want you to think about why that might be. So, first off, let's talk about VO2. Remember, VO2 is the rate of oxygen consumption. And so, since it's a rate, we would put a little dot above that V. So it's a rate of oxygen consumption. And we can calculate VO2 as the product of cardiac output and arterial venous oxygen difference. Cardiac output is how much blood is leaving the heart, and arterial venous oxygen difference is the difference in how much oxygen is going to the muscle and how much comes back from the muscle. So these two things can tell us what a person's VO2 is. And they also give us an idea of some of the things that will influence VO2, with cardiac output being a very strong influencer of it. So, heart failure is a condition that affects tons of people in the United States, over 5 million cases per year. Cardiovascular disease in general is one of the top killers and a major cost to the healthcare system, not to mention the cost that it provides to this patient in terms of social, physical, emotional cost, and also their caretakers. So this is an extremely big problem. And one of the biggest issues with it is that their exercise capacity goes way down and they can't take care of themselves. Eventually, their exercise capacity can get low enough that they don't have a high enough VO2 to even live, right? So, understanding what's causing the decrease in exercise capacity and heart failure can help us improve therapies for these individuals and hopefully improve their quality of life and maybe even decrease the severity of the disease. So, a lot of you going into medicine, your parents or your roommates might be wondering, why on earth are you studying exercise? Who cares about exercise? Well, there are a million examples of why you should study exercise and why you should care about it. But one that's very clear is heart failure. Heart failure is diagnosed and classified, the severity of it is classified based on exercise tolerance, with the least severe cases of heart failure having no limitation to physical activity, no 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 evidence of hard breathing or shortness of breath, and the worst cases of heart failure being those people who can't even get around walking around the house on their own without getting winded. Um, so, in a sense, in heart failure, it's taking something that should be really easy for them, like going up a couple of steps, like 4 or 5 steps, because of impairments in their aerobic metabolism in the cardiovascular system, something that should be easy is now ridiculously hard for them and fatiguing. And you can imagine how that would impair the quality of life. So, another reason why exercise is relevant to heart failure and cardiovascular disease is that VO2 max is often used as a determinant of if a person gets put on a transplant list or not. That's right. They're exercising these people that have heart failure. They're doing exercise tests on them. So exercise tests can be done in a lot of people, not just your healthy, fit people. But what's been found is that individuals with a VO2 max less than 14 milliliters per kilogram per minute are much more likely to die in the near future. And so they are put on the heart transplant list if they have heart failure, if that's what's causing the decrease. If you have a person with heart failure that has a VO2 max of like 16 or 17, uh, the evidence indicates that they can probably hold off of a transplant for a while because they're stable enough. So, VO2 max determines if a person gets a transplant. Also, exercise training is like the standard therapy for people with heart failure. If you can get them to exercise and increase their exercise capacity, they become more independent, and also the severity of the disease and the likelihood of them dying in the near future often decreases. Now, one of the things that happens is that because we call it heart failure, uh, all the therapies are generally targeted to overloading the heart, but can often ignore the muscle and not overload the muscle. In a patient with heart failure, the heart is definitely a weakness, and that's one of the things that decreases their VO2 max and decreases their exercise capacity. But because the heart is basically dying, you can't do an exercise that will overload the heart enough that will also still provide enough stimulus to the muscle to adapt. So if you can't get a person with heart failure to run fast enough or walk fast enough to the point where they're going to overload the mitochondria and the muscle sufficient to elicit adaptation. So there are different ways to go about this, but you can do targeted exercise therapies to target all of these different steps in the oxygen cascade, not just one of them. And what evidence has shown, and several studies have shown, is that if you can improve the function of these things, of the vasculature, of the muscle, of the mitochondria, even if you don't impact the function of the heart at all, you can still improve the health and function of a person with heart failure. So as we go through the next week or two, I want you to think about what things could impair VO2 max in patients with heart failure and all sorts of other diseases. But as for our lesson coming up today, we're really going to focus on how one of the major classifications of heart failure is how much stroke volume they can have. If they can eject enough blood or the same amount of blood as normal with each heartbeat. So we'll focus a lot on stroke volume and how much blood leaves the heart in our next lesson.